Welcome back to the All Turtles Podcast, the show about the future of work, the future of health, and entrepreneurs building the future with tech like AI. I'm John Cifuentes, co-founder of All Turtles. Today, I'm interviewing Mary Gray. Mary is a senior principal researcher at Microsoft and a faculty affiliate at Harvard, and the author of Ghostwork: How to Stop Silicon Valley from Building a New Global Underclass. So we're here today with Mary Gray, and Mary is a senior principal researcher at Microsoft and a bunch of other cool things, and an E.J. Safra Center of Ethics Fellow, which you definitely want to hear more about, and a faculty member or affiliate at Harvard's Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society. And if that's not enough, she's also an author. Her new book is Ghostwork: How to Stop Silicon Valley from Building a New Global Underclass. Mary, thanks so much for joining us. Thanks for making time.
Thanks, John.
So I looked a bit into your research, pre-Microsoft and what you're doing now. Is there a common thread that kind of ties it all together? Or could you just give us like a little preamble and what you're working on now?
Yeah, no, thanks for the invitation to come speak with your listeners. So if there's one question I seem to find myself asking over and over again, it's what difference does the internet make to our daily lives? And in a lot of ways, I'm interested in how we become more seen or less seen because of the internet. So, for example, a lot of my earlier work was thinking about young people in rural parts of the United States who were coming out as lesbian, gay, bi, trans, or questioning, and they live in places where most people assume that the internet would be useful for getting away from where they are, from being able to escape a hostile place. But by the end of that research, I found a lot of young people were using digital technologies, social media, and the internet to really make themselves more visible locally. They'd put up websites, they'd share discussion boards with each other, and usually the first thing they searched when they went online was for somebody who was gay in their town. And so wow. I've always been really just captivated by that, in many ways we think of the internet and digital technologies as a way of becoming more understood. And sometimes that can be true. And in other cases, it's not really about the technologies at all. It's about what resources are available to people. Yeah, it's just kind of this inherent socializing fabric. Yeah.
So what are some of those research questions that you're pursuing now, kind of as a result of that?
Yeah, so when I came to Microsoft Research, I immediately set to the task of understanding what is artificial intelligence, what does all this big data do for us, and fairly quickly I ran into engineers and computer scientists who were using this thing called human computation to help develop artificial intelligence. So it turns out to be able to build any sort of decision-making system, which is basically what artificial intelligence is. It's a software, fancy word for software, that makes a decision that otherwise we might make ourselves. You need a lot of training data. You need material that shows you lots of human decisions. And to get a really good training data set to create an accurate model of human decision-making, it turns out you actually need to hire a lot of people hired through this mechanism of human computation. That basically means you're handing off a task that the computation can't quite do yet, which is something like, give me keywords that I would associate with a certain term, or attach a label to an image of a dog so that I know it's a dog. So that in the training data, you've got a label, you've got metadata, is what it's called. And every time I'd ask a computer scientist or an engineer, like, who are these people that you're hiring? Now that I understand it's not just the magic of software. Right. And I would get the range of responses of everything from, I don't know. And literally, they just continue to tell me about their amazing software.
That's not tone deaf at all.
Not at all. Insert computer scientist joke here.
Right.
But then there were folks who would say, I don't know and I don't have to know. And that's really the beauty of human computation, is that I can hire people to do a task and I don't have to handle any of the logistics, that literally this mixture of computation and the ability to call a human to complete a task mean I don't have to interact with people. It was really when I started meeting people who said, I don't know and I don't think I want to know, that I was hooked. I immediately felt like I need to understand both who are the people who are hired to do this work, but also what are the implications of not being able to see who it is who might be delivering a service to you. And that's really the connection to my larger question, which is, how is the internet making people more or less seen who are on the job in this case?
And it's interesting, these are for complex tasks in, whatever we're using an interface to design or find or learn, but then also for, some of the more banal use cases, finding images, videos, search terms, things like that. We're just, it's curious or interesting to me, the necessity for human input for these banal tasks, but also, as you kind of said, the computer scientists, disdain isn't the right word, just kind of indifference for kind of who or what is completing these tasks.
Well, and I'd say when I met my collaborator for this project, Siddharth Suri, who's a computer scientist here at Microsoft Research, he was really the first person I met who was actually very familiar with human computation. He pioneered this methodology for behavioral studies, who was deeply curious about who the people are who do this task-based work. And so that indifference, in some ways, it's more broadly how we all tend to approach our work when we have a deadline and we need to get something done. Whoever is there kind of supporting, moving you forward, you immediately need them. And as soon as you're done with your work, if they're not, full time, they tend to fade into the woodwork. And I think for Sid, for both of us, we were really curious about not only what the implications of that are, but really who are these people we otherwise don't meet. But increasingly, it's human computation and this approach to hiring for tasks and projects is the business model. It's hiring people to be threaded into the loop of computation and to stay there to do the things that artificial intelligence really can't touch, which are things like customer service. That's text-based, a mixture of text-based and semi-automated strings of text that are building in every direction, every sector. So the reality is this is not really replacing or eliminating work. It's dismantling full-time employment.
That's quite a statement. Gives me chills. Well, can we talk a little bit about the persona or the specific people? Like who's doing this work?
Yeah. I mean, the best thing is, the reality is it's people like you and me. I mean, what makes this the best thing is it's what we found were young parents who could not take a shift job because they couldn't work a schedule that was assigned to them. We met people in college who were supplementing their college education and costs of books and housing with picking up online work. We met people who were always on, who were effectively leaving full-time employment because they weren't finding other opportunities. And comparing India and the United States was really useful because we were meeting people who do not have formal employment opportunities where they live. So they were banking that they could work on multiple platforms and turn this into a full-time income stream if they learned how to get as efficient as possible with their time. And all of those different types of people are participating in these labor markets. And really, in many ways, because many of these platforms, whether we're talking about on-demand platforms for creating a website, or even, as we try to connect it in the book, to online to offline delivery like Uber or Deliveroo, in most cases, people are responding to an open call that says, hey, if you want to sign up for an account and do this task, feel free.
Right.
And everything from there means that a person who might respond to that call could choose or may only have time for working a specific number of hours and that's the amount they give. Or if they decide, no, this is what they're going to do as their main income stream, they're spending 40 to 60 hours a week doing this work. And then there's this long tail of experimentalists who are literally testing out a platform, pick one or two projects, realize this is maybe not work they want to do, or they find better opportunities or other things that interest them, and they're gone. And all three of those types of people participating in these markets are equally, if differently, valuable to keeping this marketplace afloat.
Are these people remunerated in fair ways? And I have a biased answer to this in my head, but I don't know the data. I don't. Are these good jobs?
So this is the troubling part. We don't know, because the reality is we don't have a way of taking the head count of people working on demand. I mean, this is a global labor supply chain, if you will. Right. It's a global commons of people participating in on-demand, contract-driven work. So the short answer is we really honestly don't know. I think our research tells us that once someone figures out how to navigate this world, like any on-demand, or rather like any person working contract or freelance, they may have worked out how to make a living. It has taken a lot of sweat equity to get there, and there are absolutely people who do not figure it out, and they're not fairly compensated for the energy they put into this marketplace. We would argue we don't have the economic models for how to value people who are not only just delivering a service in the moment. It's not just the task that they complete, it's that they're making themselves available for the next task. And that's the challenge here, is this is really the collision of service economies, which we've not really economically shown a lot of capacity to fairly compensate. So think about your average nurse's aide or teacher's aide. Those are examples of service industry work that are socially, we might say, really important, but not economically valued.
Yeah.
Not to mention all the unpaid parental care out there.
Right.
But at the same time, we're not really recognizing that most of what we've built out to make this a good job comes from really social struggles over 2 centuries of making sure that people have good working conditions, that they have fair wages, and that we have figured out how to do that for full-time employment. We have not figured out how to do that for people who are working outside of an office environment 9 to 5.
Yeah, something's coming up for me. I think it was a tweet stream that went viral a few weeks ago. It was one of these workers. She was somewhere middle America. Like I imagine the persona of I know JetBlue had a lot of positive press for employing the semi-skilled to do their customer service kind of all over the world, and particularly in rural parts of America. But it was a young woman. She was bringing it to public light that one of these substantial tagging companies, for lack of a better word, a startup, but $1 billion valuation, a largish company with many hundreds of millions of dollars raised at this point. They were for a particular line of business or a particular line of this tagging work, they cut wages by 30% without notice. And you're kind of an unnamed worker in this platform doing these tasks. And I think she said that it wound up working out to about $3 to $4 an hour is how, and this is for somewhat skilled labor, like requiring translation. And this is horrifying to me. This is this is a sign of kind of worse to come. Did you encounter these dystopian stories like that in finding these people or talking to these people in your research?
Yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately, it was really common to talk with people who had a business, often a startup, not surprisingly, that was creating work, creating numbers of projects that were building out basically a speculative project. And if you think about it, and what our research shores up is it's not uncommon for businesses, whether they're incumbents or startups, to have an idea, a germ of a project, and they need a cheap, fast way to test out their idea. And they will often turn to contract work because their full-time employees are already tasked with what might be stable projects. Right. So we often found that firms were hiring on-demand workers precisely to be able to try a project, throw it to the wall, and see if it would stick. The other use they would have was to hire somebody to replace a very specific skill set on a team that had a project that was coming due. Those were really the two use cases for using on-demand contract work, of particularly creative work. The challenge is that that is exactly how most businesses operate, right? Really today, most creative work, which in some ways is information service work, anything where you have to deliver an insight or an analysis, it's not that different than delivering a coffee. You need somebody, a group of people who are available to work on that task to get it out the door. And once you've met that need, you don't need them anymore. You need them for the next project. You actually might need a different set of people for the next project. And what's chilling is that we haven't fully accepted that this is how much of the industries that call themselves information companies or service companies, any sort of creative industry, this is how much of the work we do in the United States, but globally, gets done. It's not through hiring sets of full-time employees and holding on to them for 20 years. There's so much employment now that is organized around a fairly narrowly scoped project or task. And when that is completed, that's really the end of the relationship between the person hiring somebody and the person doing the work. What makes that a bad job is that we are all in complete denial that there are so many people who are reliant on that employment relationship. So the problem here, and the example you gave of a company that's effectively trying to make its balance sheet look as cut to the bone as possible, has every incentive to hire as few full-time employees as possible.
Of course.
But they still rely on a lot of working people. It's not like they can actually get their product out the door without people being in the mix. So this is the key insight of our book, is that really any work that can at least in part be sourced, scheduled, managed, shipped, and billed through an application programming interface, which is pretty much just software in the internet, is up for grabs, can be turned into task-based work that's done on demand. The question is really, what do we need to do to organize our social contract so that people can participate in this economy and not have to be absorbing the cost of a company that now wants to cut its rates, and a worker has no choice but to basically put up with those rates or look for another platform that will pay them better.
Is there like a midterm state or a nearish state where these types of workers will be relied on less and less, or is this increasing? It's like, how does the trend look?
This is exploding. I mean, this is what's this is the part that gives that keeps me up at night. There's no evidence that this is slowing down. And in fact, every statistic you've ever heard about the elimination of jobs, translate that into full-time employment, because we have no evidence other than in manufacturing, where it's actually not as technically a hard problem, although it's still a hard problem. It's not as technically hard to replace a person because you're literally ironing down and pinning down every detail of a moving part in let's take a factory floor. The reason you can put robots on a factory floor and replace the people who used to be there is because you can actually rebuild the factory floor. And every track where a machine might be running a box or a product line, the assembly line can be mechanized. When it comes to this world of information service, There is no obvious way to pull the human out of the loop, precisely because it is built to do everything that can be automated. We're automating, but what you're looking for is that moment of snap judgment, that moment of creative insight that humans are right now the only creatures that can offer that to you. So let me put it another way. There's no evidence that we're in short supply, or no evidence that artificial intelligence can actually replace a human if what the human is doing is something beyond a yes or no response.
Right.
So if a person is doing something that is literally the gray zone of what most of our interactions with people are, whether it's language, which I love that example because you might be able to get 80% of the words captured automatically, but it's that 20% that actually produces meaning. And the order of the words really matter. And that's why it's very difficult to get really good automated transcription service.
Right.
So those are those places where, as long as we have a social and human need for the accuracy, the kind of fidelity you can get from a human response, kind of creative response that doesn't have to have a lot of prior examples to learn from, as long as you need and expect that as a consumer, we're going to need people. I like to use the example of healthcare because of all markets where we can see an explosion of a use of on-demand service work, it's in healthcare. So you might be able to get an automated, a semi-automated system to be able to reliably give you an idea of when you need to take your next pill. But most of us are not terribly comforted by software delivering that automated notice without having a person who's checking in. If it's your elderly parent, for example,
right,
having a person actually be the last mile of delivering that service. We call that the paradox of automation's last mile, that we might be able to technically have artificial intelligence take over certain kinds of tasks. But as soon as it might reliably be able to, say, get the text message right in delivering it to a patient and prompting them to take a pill, the next level up is being able to evaluate, is this the right time? Did that patient actually have their breakfast? If they did, they shouldn't take the pill. There's just no way of automating that kind of capacity to evaluate. That's what humans bring to the table. And to your question, do we see any reduction in the need for people to be in the loop of that decision making? We only see an explosion of startups entering the industries that can take advantage of having a person in the loop.
This is interesting. What's coming up for me is like, no wonder we're also lonely, depressed, and anxious. These, but
wait, why? Explain. I want to understand.
Well, just the requirement for, or just the quality of experience, or the kind of dehumanizing that last mile, being a crappy way to get that experience, like where at least that's what initially came up.
Okay. Well, so I think what's really striking to me, and I'm a relentless optimist about this, is that we're at the very beginning of bringing people into these exchanges that otherwise, in many ways, are kind of typical, that we already text with each other. We already have ways of being in constant connection. And to me, and I think for the argument of the book is to recognize the work conditions that's ghost work refers to the conditions of doing this work. It doesn't have to be like this.
Right.
It can be that the person who receives that text message genuinely knows there's a person who cares, who's in that loop, or is literally a phone call away. So that could be the service offered.
How do we flip the script? Like I think about other industries, like exploitation and capitalism go hand in hand. But
Yes.
I think
Yes, they
about
do.
other industries in which there's been some form of public reckoning, like whether it's fashion or food or consumer electronics.
Yes.
But in information delivery, like this kind of fundamental thing that we just, take for granted, that Gmail's free and Google's free and Facebook's free. Is there a public outcry that's coming? Like, or what's the not that I think there needs to be a reckoning, but maybe how do we hold these companies more accountable? Like, how do we highlight these stories in a way that there's an opportunity to do something better versus just convince them to make less money?
Yeah. And I think actually, to me, it is saying that this isn't just these tech companies. This is every company. The net employment growth in the last decade, if you believe economists, has come from the growth of staffing and temporary work. So most of our economy in the United States, that's just in the US, most of our economy is driven by temp jobs. And more of those temp jobs are going to be harnessed and channeled through human computation, through this way of producing on-demand work. There's every bit of evidence that when we're talking about building the capacity to manage work, quote unquote, we're talking about dismantling full-time employment and making it easier to distribute projects and tasks, because that's much of what most industries have to offer are projects and tasks. Most of what they're running on are projects and tasks, not long-term, 20 years from now I'll be producing X, Y, or Z. It is, for the next 18 months, we're going to work on this project organized around this theme. So if we see that trend and track that trend, to your point, if we look at earlier examples of when we all started paying attention, both as consumers but also as workers, to the conditions that were leading to really unfair, unsafe work conditions, whether it was in agriculture and textiles, that they become moments for everyone to organize and say, this isn't right. And we're going to set a new set of expectations for how to get our goods fairly and justly and economically.
Sure.
There is no way to address this future of work without seeing how we are all likely going to be experiencing this next revolution or evolution of capitalism. And to your point, it could get really ugly if we believe the market should be the solution to right now the lack of social safety net for people who are working outside of full-time employment relationships. Then we're very likely going to see the same pain that was produced at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. I mean, it took a good 50 years to even recognize the problem of child labor.
Right. So let's end on a positive note. Why? And as a self-described optimist, what should we be optimistic about with what's happening now? Like, what are the opportunities?
That we're catching it so soon. If we can go from a headline that's shocked that there are people necessary to moderate our social media content or make sure our search results are accurate, and move to recognizing that, yes, there are people at work who are making our experiences of these technologies more accurate, more transparent, optimized for what we want, then we can start addressing the work conditions that are going to lead to a better information ecosystem and to a better opportunity for our own work futures. At the end of the day, like, content moderation is such a good example of this.
Right.
It shouldn't surprise us that it's really hard to automate recognizing the difference between a word said in love and a word said in hate. Like, anybody who's ever used a nickname to tease somebody
right.
knows that you can throw that with a lot of anger, and you can throw it with a lot of sweetness, right? So we know that that's technically a very difficult problem to solve. And arguably, one of the things that will stay with us is that we're going to have the rise of this new profession of people who are tasked with reviewing the material we create online, who become something like a mix of, a first responder and a librarian and a, school recess monitor.
Right.
And the best thing we could do is recognize the value of those jobs, recognize the value of the work that people are doing in those moments, but also recognize there isn't a way to turn that into full-time employment. There are ways in which that will remain task-based, service-based, task-based, project-based, because for the most part, the problems of being able to review material, you have to have enough domain expertise to be able to make sense of that material.
Right.
And that's not something you're going to do for the next 20 years. If you're looking for being able to recognize the most recent or most up-to-date song lyrics that can be turned into hate speech, then you probably need people who know the song lyrics.
Right.
Right? So, and you need to have them know it in not just English, but Portuguese and Spanish and Hindi. So there's a lot of domain expertise we're going to need to call to the table to do content moderation, just as one example. And it's a really good place for us to recognize as consumers that we benefit from people doing this work. The tech companies absolutely need to be recognizing that they won't be getting people out of this service loop anytime soon, but it will be us collectively, as it always has been, civil actors, organizers on workers' behalf, workers themselves, consumers, coming together and saying, we need to make sure that the work conditions for the people handling our information are good work conditions if we want quality information. We really did come to that realization with agriculture and with the clothing we wear. It's no different when it comes to the information we consume.
Right. Well, Mary, this is all fascinating stuff. We really appreciate you coming on. This is a really great conversation. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And now it's time for a listener question. This one comes in from Gary via email. And Gary says, for future sci-fi entrepreneurship episodes, can you interview the authors of some of the works that you discussed?
Yeah, that's a good idea. I don't know if we're going to do more of the sci-fi stuff. We might. We were kind of doing it as a one-off series, but I think it went pretty well, so it'd be cool to do it again. I'm actually not sure who's still alive of the authors that we talked about, but that reminds me, actually, I think 2 years ago, about 2 years ago, I heard that Ursula K. Le Guin had died.
Right.
I was really sad because I'm a big fan of hers, but also because it never occurred to me that she was still alive.
Right.
I read her stuff in high school or something,
Grade school,
college, I just never thought about it. And it kind of made me sad that I had all this time that I could have gone and heard her speak or talk to her or something. And I just didn't think to, because I never even thought that she was an actual living human being until I heard that she had passed away. So I think if there's any author that you want to talk to, it's definitely a good idea to just go and talk to them, because I think most authors aren't actually that hard to get a hold of.
Yeah, I have no idea. I guess we could do a narrative, a reimagining of, several sci-fi authors.
We could maybe do a seance. I think that would be in keeping with the sci-fi theme. But I think if we do another series, we will try to cover some books by living authors that we can interview.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Gary. And if you have any listener questions, you can send us an email at hello@all-turtles.com or tweet us at @allturtlesco. This podcast is a production of the All Turtles Worldwide Media Empire. We recorded this episode in the world-class Donatello Studios in San Francisco, California. Thanks to Mary Gray for joining us this episode. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions for future episodes, send us an email to hello@all-turtles.com. Marie reads every message. Thanks to everyone who made this episode possible, including Jim Metzendorf for editing, Marie McCoy-Thompson for producing, Chris Plug for his audio expertise, Micah Rivera for our artwork, and Matt Ammerman for our theme music. On behalf of Jessica Collier, Phil Libin, and yours truly, John Cifuentes, and the rest of the All Turtles team, thanks for listening.